Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the International E podcast. Before we start, let me talk a little bit about the podcast. So, the International E podcast is going to be a space where different international students, prospective ones, as well as current international students, could get a glimpse of the life of international students in the US or abroad. This week, I am joined by Sinafik. Welcome to the show, Sinafik.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm very, very excited too. So before we delve into our conversation, let me talk a little bit about you. So Sinafik is originally from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and is a Mount Holyoke class of 2015 graduate. She currently serves as the executive director for Young Ethiopian Professionals, YEP, a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2010 that aims to be a global connection point for the professional community. Outside of her tenure at YEP, she works as account executive, assistant vice president for employee benefits in Lockton, Northeast Washington, D.C. office, and serves as the primary business contact for clients. She also founded and co-manages Birara Genet, a nonprofit organization that empowers underrepresented community members in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, through targeted and job-relevant skill training programs. Would you like to add more to your bio?
No, I'll just make a quick correction because a lot of people
Okay.
still think of YEP as Young Ethiopian Professionals. We used
Oh,
to
it's
be.
not.
Now we
Okay.
are Your Ethiopian Professionals. But no, it's we
Ah,
were. Now we're
you're
turned that U acronym into Your.
into
But
your.
no,
Okay.
yeah. But everything else you got right.
Great. Great. Thank you for the correction. I actually have it as you're here, but then I was like, maybe that's a mistake. Let
No,
me correct.
no, and a lot of people
Yeah.
come to us and they say, "You used to be young, and now you're something different."
Yeah.
We really liked the YEP acronym. We wanted to retain it, and I think we also wanted to
Mm-hmm.
evolve from this mentality of feeling like we were exclusive to a specific age group, and just reiterate, "Hey, this is your network. Like anybody can tap into
Uh,
it if they want to." So,
nice. Nice.
yeah,
Nice. Thank
but
you for the
no.
clarification. Yeah.
No, I also wanted to really appreciate what you're doing
Oh,
because
thank you.
creating a platform for international
Mhm.
students to talk about their very intricate experiences is something that I was very passionate
Mhm.
about. I mean, we had a short-lived
Yeah.
podcast, RIP and
Yeah.
Jengar,
I know. I love
that
listening to that. Yeah.
that me and Meti, who
Mm-hmm.
also went to your alma mater, started
Yeah.
years ago, and it
Mm-hmm.
is not no easy work. And I feel like
Yeah.
the U.S. is a top destination for international students. There's so much of
Mm-hmm.
us, but I still feel like there aren't a lot of platforms. So the fact that you've been
Yeah.
doing this so consistently, and you are, you're being that platform where people can
Mm-hmm.
tap in and really get a lot
Mm-hmm.
of insights. I think it's incredible. So
Yeah.
want to
Oh.
appreciate you and also really
Uh,
thank you for having me on your
yeah.
platform.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's really important to me to create this platform, and I can't believe it's been 3 years now. Like time just goes by so fast.
Yeah.
And I try to be consistent. It's not easy, but it's something that I struggle with too. But I try to at least upload an episode every month. But
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is passion work, and you're doing this while you're going to grad school and have other
I know.
personal and professional commitments. So it's not easy.
Yeah,
But the
I
fact that you're
know.
still doing it, I
Yeah.
think says a lot about you. So I
Thank
really
you. Thank you
appreciate you.
so much. Thank you, Sinafik. I really appreciate that. So the topic of our episode today is dealing with challenges, aiming for and achieving professional success. So, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear this topic in the context of being an international student?
Um, a lot of things. I think, first I want to caveat that I know that international students, foreign national workers, we're not a monolith. So a lot of what I'm saying today is a reflection based on my personal experiences. But I know there are also a lot of international students that don't need any advice from people like me because, you know, the very notion of traveling to a foreign country and integrating culturally, that is the building block for success. That is a key marker for success. So there are a lot of international students that are killing it wherever they are. They don't need any advice. So a lot of
Mhm.
my commentary is going to be geared towards, students who are about to graduate, whether it's undergrad or graduate school, and early stage professionals that are really navigating just the professional journey, mostly career oriented. So I think one thing I will say that comes to my mind, and the reason that I oriented it as aiming for and achieving, one, the emphasis should be on aiming for, because I think it's very important for us to be intentional. I think intention comes before any outcome. And I think why achieving success comes after that is because I feel like success is just a natural extension of effort and being intentional. But I think for me, again, going back to what I said earlier about international students just traveling to a foreign country and having to integrate, there is a lot that is required of you to navigate that journey. So naturally, it's going to come with a lot of challenges. And I feel like I hear a lot of stories of, the people around me, or people that I know of who have done it and who aimed and who've achieved, and it inspires me. But it's one that comes with a lot of challenges. So I feel like I think I personally take a lot of onus, and I'm sure you do as well. And that's why you created this platform, right? To give to the younger generation or the people that come after us, so that it doesn't need to be so challenging. I don't subscribe to the philosophy that challenge needs to be ubiquitous and ever present. If we could alleviate that through information gap closing alone, I take that very seriously. So I think for me, what comes to my mind is that there are a lot of powerful stories of people who've made so much out of so little, and it comes with a lot of challenges. So I think I've learned a lot through my personal journey. So I'm very excited to share some of the things that worked for me, in case they work for somebody that's listening.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. Thank you so much, Sinafik. That makes a lot of sense. As I was like hearing your answer, I was nodding and like smiling, because like I relate to a lot of the things that you mentioned. So maybe like we can frame the conversation like in two ways, as you have mentioned about the topic. So first is like aiming for, and then the second one is achieving it. So when we talk about like how do you like aim for success as an international student? So let's like go back to like when you were a college student, you first moved. How was that experience like for you? Did you have an idea of like what success was at that point in your mind? Was it graduating, or did you come up with it as the process of being an international student, like from first year to second year to third year? Was it a progress, or like what was going through your mind as a college student?
It's a very good question. And I can tell you that my journey in college was more reactive than proactive, which is very different than my journey as a worker or somebody who is navigating the career side. So I always think of my experience in the US as kind of two buckets. There's college and then post college. I think post college Sinafik is very different. And I mean, we all evolve very drastically post college, because that's like the first time that you have a lot of agency in setting the tone of your life, because you're not in a structured environment, you're not on a schedule, you're essentially creating the schedule. But I think for me, I'll talk a little bit about my personal experience, and then I'll kind of weave in some things that helped me be intentional, or kind of that aim for bucket that we were talking about. But one, I was fortunate enough to have attended a college that had a lot of international students. I definitely want to recognize Mount Holyoke as an institution that was very intentional about recruiting international students. I worked in the admission office and I saw the process live, and it was very important to them. It wasn't just a stat. And I was a tour guide, so I remember always saying, 23% of our student body are international students, but it was very important. And I was also very, very, very fortunate enough to go to Mount Holyoke with 3 other Nazareth students that were my friends. So the 4 of us really, along with Meti, who went to Smith, as you know, is in the 5 college consortium. So the 5 of us really created a sense of belonging for each other. So I just, I want to use this public platform to thank them, because I think my experience would have been very different. And that, gave me a very safe space. But graduating will then burst that bubble, because you go from having that structure, and when you're in an international environment, it gives you a microcosm experience of what the US is, and you don't get to see maybe just how foreign you are. And I think I realized how foreign I was after I graduated and I joined corporate America. I went into consulting, and then I saw faces that didn't look like me. I heard English being spoken in a way that didn't sound familiar to me, even though I felt like I spoke English well. So that was such a drastic change, and that was what made me realize just how much of my college experience was reactive. I wasn't necessarily being intentional about arming myself with the tools that I needed to be successful, to show up as my whole self. I felt like I tapped into some resources, but not others. So if I could start kind of giving advice to,
please do.
honestly, mostly it's the younger iteration of me, because I try to talk to her often. I feel like she's different. She's living in a different timeline, and she's, navigating life. So I just want to tell her, like, hey, if you just do these 5 things, you're going to get to where we need to be a little bit more, a little bit more sooner than I did. But one is create a sense of belonging for yourself. There is a lot of ownership that you should take in that process. I think for international students, because our voyage takes us from, our home country to then our host country, there's always a duality about our experience. So I feel like a lot of us, myself especially, I felt like I was here and there. And sometimes I felt like I wasn't here or there. I felt like I was always trying. And when nothing felt natural to me, there were times where I just disconnected, because just the act of living day-to-day life felt very it felt like it required a lot of energy out of me, because I still felt like I had to either work to be a part of this country, or work very hard not to feel disconnected from where I came from. And then whenever I traveled back, I also had to work to prove that I wasn't different, that I was still there. And it was because it felt like constant work. I think there were times where I just disconnected, and I was like, but I do think that it's important to define what belonging means to you. Sometimes it can be as small as, I have these group of friends that feel like a community for me, and I'm going to hold on to that. Or it could be, hey, I want this country to feel like more of a home to me, and these are the steps that I need to take to make that happen. Then go about it. But I think the key message is, nothing is organic. There's no space that you go into and it automatically feels like home, because that was what I thought our country was for me. But then every time I would go back, it felt different. I was like, oh, why is it different? And that's because no place is static. Every place is dynamic. Every place is changing. And there's work in also feeling like you belong. And a lot of that work is on you, unfortunately, but fortunately it is on you. So you have agency, and then you'll start to see the fruit of your outcome. Like I said, aim for it, and then the achieving success will come after. And then the second thing is, I think international students need to step out of the scarcity mindset, because
that's a big one.
Because I definitely had it, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like you do, because again, our journey takes us from one place to another, right? That feels big in and of itself. I mean, think about it. Me moving to the US at 17, that was my first time on a plane. My first time on a plane was me packing up 2 bags and then moving to a country that I had never been to. And the US felt closer to me because I watched a lot of Gossip Girl and Friends growing up. So
Yeah.
I was expecting the Upper East Side when
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
when I landed at Dulles Airport in Virginia. So our journey sometimes, because it feels big, we
Yeah.
think that we still think big, but the thing is, and I know that, the US isn't the only destination for international student, but within the context of the US, which was our experience, right? There's an immigration process that automatically puts you in the scarcity mindset, right? Your student visa has an expiration date. Your OPT, your work permit, has an expiration date. Your work visa has an expiration date. Like every status that you have, unless it gets you to a permanent residency or a citizenship, it's temporary. So that automatically, I think, puts a lot of people into, oh my God, like you're working on a deadline. So I think we need to be intentional about identifying that thought, because I feel like we mirror it into our job search. We limit ourselves. We even apply that into our plans of where we're going to be based out of, because years ago, and there are things that because I always thought I was an ambitious person who always thought big, right? But then I remember around graduation, or when I was a student, I would always be just talking about limitations. I'll be like, I have to find a job. I know I'm not going to find a job. And so I have to like settle for this job that's not going to pay me anything because I need to have that OPT, or you even start to think it's either staying in the US or moving back. Like you think those are your only options. And I see it in a lot of the international students that I talk to who reach out and are about to graduate, and they're always like, they're brilliant and the world is their oyster, but they're not thinking that way because they're just trying to solve this immediate need of figuring out their immigration status. So again, I will not lie to you on this platform and say that there is an easy way to figure out your immigration status. So I don't want this to sound like a very disconnected advice from the reality on the ground. Immigration is challenging regardless of how you do it. I just say step out of that mindset, like limit that challenge to the immigration alone, because that's already going to take a lot out of you. But also identify, hey, are there thought patterns that I'm applying into my professional development? Am I limiting myself from even entertaining other things because I'm fighting this other fight? Try to separate them as much as you can. And it definitely affected me, because I felt like, again, because I was working so hard on just figuring out my immigration status, I felt like sometimes I disconnected because I didn't want to think anymore. So I felt like there were career opportunities that I wasn't intentional about pursuing, or even moves that I was like, man, maybe I should have lived in Portugal for a year. I mean,
right, why not?
Why not, right? And sometimes even if it's not supported by action, just giving yourself that liberty to say, I can do whatever. Like that is so liberating. And I want, if you're an international student who's a senior, and you're not hearing that in yourself, I just want, and it could be very different to you. We're not a monolith. For some people, staying in the US is success. Like just don't limit yourself, because there are a lot of things that make you tap into that mindset. But I'll pause. I mean, I have other ideas, and then I want you to also, if there are other questions that
no, thank you so much. I didn't want to interrupt you, because I really, really like your thought process and how you were mentioning a lot of the things. Well, like one of the things that stuck with me was the duality of our experience. So when you said, like, I completely related with that. Like when we're here in the US, we're like, oh, we feel like we're missing out on whatever is happening back home, and then we rush to go back home, and then while we're there, we're like, oh, this is not what I expected to happen at all. And so we feel like we're always missing out on something just because we are physically removed from our home place. So it's this experience of, like, to being too American for the Ethiopians, or like too Ethiopian for the Americans. It's always this kind of like, we're always juggling between these two places that we call home. And I feel like for me personally, that has been one of the biggest challenges that I faced, especially like when I moved back to Ethiopia for work. And that was also another set of challenge, because I was like, I grew up here, like I should be able to fit in perfectly, but that's not how it happened at all. And you said like places change, things are dynamic, people change, and it's a lot of things that we have to get used to at the same time. But I think one of the things that helped me was also like being okay with missing out on stuff. Like you can't always be there in person, right? I mean, you try your hardest, to stay connected with family and friends, but at the same time, because you're physically not there, you are going to miss out on a lot of things that are happening in your family and in the country, and things in general. So I think as I learned to be okay with missing certain things that were happening, I think that became easier for me to process and appreciate the place that I resided in, regardless of where that was. So I wanted to comment on that. And then the second, like the first thing you mentioned about like belongingness, and that's like a big part of being an international student, is like when you feel like you belong somewhere, that's when you're like safe, that's where you're comfortable, that's where like it reminds you of the feeling of home. And once that is like stripped away from you, and like you don't feel safe, you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel like you belong in a certain place, that could be very, very challenging to navigate as an international student just by yourself. So like as you mentioned, like surrounding yourself with people who remind you of home, who are close to you, who love you and support you, is like one of the biggest things that also has helped me succeed as an international student. And then the scarcity mindset that you mentioned, I was laughing the whole time, because I also, like, obviously every single international student who's a senior goes through this choice of like, do I stay or do I move back? And when you put it that way, it's like that was my thought process too. Like my only two options are staying in the US or going back home. And I chose to go back home. And I was like, that's it. I'm not even entertaining this whole immigration process. Like it's too much. Let me just take even though it was a risk, even though it was challenging, I decided to do that. And I'm sure like other people also have different reasons to do that, but I think we kind of lose sight of the opportunities that we have to think outside of the box. As you mentioned, like we're always stuck into that mentality of just like one or the other. So I think it was very, very important that that you mentioned that. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I think I really liked what you said about not feeling enough for both places, because that really is what it is. If I can be candid about my personal experience, when I graduated, I told everybody, my parents, I'm moving back. I said maybe I'll give it a year, but I'm moving back. And then I just stayed because opportunities came about that I couldn't say no to. And then sometimes your immigration process decides it for you, because I got a work visa. So I was like, let me just stay because I have the visa, right? And then, but the thing that I was always so vigilant about is, because I had committed to moving back, I refused to make the US home. So whenever the US felt foreign to me, I always thought, this place doesn't feel like home. This is why I need to move back. But I was being very intentional about not making home for myself. And then again, because I thought Ethiopia was static and it was going to be exactly how I left it, not also realizing that I've changed. I'm not the 17-year-old girl who left. And then when I went back, and that I didn't feel enough for the place that I was in, then it was like, oh my God, I'm neither here nor there. And I went into the victim mentality, and I think that's where, in a way, we are victims, because I think we reap the good things of this experience, which is we're exposed to opportunities, we get privileges that not a lot of people get, and I try not to forget that, but in a way we also miss out because we leave there. There are things, there are goodbyes to experiences, to friendships, family dynamics. There's so much that happens without you, and there's definitely grief there. So I'm not taking away from that, but I was very intentional about not making the US home for an extended period of time. And I think when I got to a point where I'm like, I didn't move back, and I stayed. I had to remind myself of all of the things that I did that I had to undo to make it feel like home. And I think the best thing, I forgot the author. I think it may have been Brian West, but she has a collection of essays where she said, "Be where your feet are," and I thought that was so powerful,
I love
because
that. Mm.
again, when you think about the duality, we're always here and there. Our bodies may be here, our minds are there, and I'll just say, I don't think that's ever going to go away,
Yeah.
because if you have a connection to a place, even if you're not there, you're always going to feel connected to it. But
Mm-hmm.
try to be where your feet are as much as you can,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're not, time passes by. Time passes by really fast, but
Yeah.
time passes those who are at odds with where they are very, very, very fast. So try to see where your feet are, and if you have that clarity that this is not where you want to be, then make a decision that gets you very close to where you want to be. And I think what you said about not being enough for both places, I think what I said about creating a sense of belonging, try to be enough for you. Um,
Mm. I
Try to
love
be
that.
enough, because there are a lot of people. I love my friends because there's a variety in our
Mm-hmm.
experiences, even though we have that commonality of being international students. But I have friends who moved back, I have friends who've stayed here, I have friends who moved to other parts of the world, right?
Yeah.
And I love that variety.
Yeah.
So it's not just one path,
Mm.
but be at peace with you, because you
Mm-hmm.
are your longest relationship. You're going to have the longest conversations with yourself. So try to be enough for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And to reflect on kind of a couple more tips that, again, I wish younger Sinafik worked on a little bit
Yeah.
quickly.
Uh-huh.
It's so funny because I say Sinafik because I spend a lot of time in corporate America, but I have to remind myself, I can say Sinafik when I'm with you. I can say
Yes. Yes.
Sinafik, younger
Yes, please do.
Sinafik. Um, the third one that I see being a gap, in a lot of international students, and also a lot of people within our community, is tap into resources. The US is a plethora of professional advancement resources, but
Mm-hmm.
they need to be tapped into and they need to be sought out. They
Mm-hmm.
may not feel easily available or accessible, but they exist. And again, my personal experience, I feel like this country, um, there's a lot of diversity in terms of industries that are blossoming, whether it's creative arts, whether it's STEM. There's a lot that's constantly happening, and I mean, it is a global mecca for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
industries. So there's so much mobility, there's so much that's happening, and I don't see international students, and again, it could be because we're fighting that fight of the scarcity mindset, and we're dealing with other challenges that we kind of check out in other parts. But that is one where I felt like I did not tap into resources, whether I was in college or even when I was an early stage professional. Now I am very intentional about seeking out, whether it's through my
Mm-hmm.
employer or through other things that I'm engaged with. And you know what? If you don't feel like there are resources for you, then create them. Because that's another thing that I feel like this country does a good job of, is it definitely arms you with a lot of tools. And we're living in a globally connected digital era.
Yeah.
There are so many skill sets that you can
Mm-hmm.
learn, through a 10-minute video on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And we should also be, this is why international students, I feel like, should be a resource for one another. This is why I feel like your platform is
Mm-hmm.
so powerful, because that is a resource. That's
Mm-hmm.
information. These are insights, connections.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not to turn this into a selling pitch, but
Yeah.
Your Ethiopian Professionals. The reason that I joined YEP, because I moved to the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and I
Mm-hmm.
went to a networking event, and YEP is. And I'm talking about YEP even before I
Mm-hmm.
joined. YEP is an organization that's been around for 13 years that aims to be a platform for our community to tap into so that they can grow personally and professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it really, um, I don't want to make it sound emotionally heightened, but it
Yeah.
disappoints me when I don't see people show up. And then those same people talk about scarcity in resources.
Mm.
So if you're listening to this and you feel like, there is nothing, is that really the case?
Mhm.
Have you really sought out everything, and have you
Mhm.
showed up? Again, there's a
Mhm.
lot, there's a lot of work that needs
Yeah.
to happen before success on the other
Mhm.
side. And then the second part that I'll reflect on, and then I'll let you chime in with
Mhm.
reflections or questions, is networking. And
Ah. Yes.
networking was a buzzword that
Yeah.
I heard a lot of, and I hated it. I hated it when I was in college. I was like, what does this mean? Why does everybody say it?
Yes.
I'm a fairly social person, but I feel like I don't do well in environments where I feel like I have to talk to
Mhm.
people. Like, I want it to feel organic. And I think network
Mhm.
has that connotation of, like, you have to be on, like, come on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is another area where I see our community lagging a little bit in the
Mhm.
professional context. And again, I can say this confidently because I've been a part of YEP
Mhm.
for 7 years.
Mhm.
YEP has hosted over 400 events, could be more if you think about our virtual events, right? And then I see a lot of people come, and then maybe they're there for an event and then they leave.
Mhm.
But I think networking is very important, because
Mhm.
networking is just building connections.
Yeah.
It's building relationships, and
Mhm.
I also think it's very important to diversify your network.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
is one where I was guilty of, because I remember, again, in college, right? I had my bubble.
Mhm.
So because I knew I was in foreign land,
Mhm.
I stuck to, the five of us, like, we
Mhm.
stuck together. And then
Yeah.
we had our community.
Yeah.
When we went out, it was us that I don't feel like, and I also had a lot of international student friends, but I also feel like I didn't challenge myself to just, like, step out of my
Mhm.
element and meet
Mhm.
people that, sure, they may be from different places, so there may not have been commonality in the like, places that we
Yeah.
originated from,
Right.
but personalities, career aspirations could have aligned us. So
Mhm.
so now, I am very intentional about diversifying my network, because
Mhm.
I work in the corporate world. There are not a lot of people that look like me,
Mhm.
unfortunately, but that doesn't deter me from
Yeah.
building relationships, because there are so many
Yeah.
connections that I've had with people that don't look like me, but that have
Yeah.
been instrumental. And
Mhm.
networking is also social, right? You're also giving yourself more things to make the
Yeah.
places that you're in
Mhm.
feel like the places that you should be in.
Mhm.
It help you with the sense of belonging that I was talking
Mhm.
about. I
Mhm.
I love where I work.
Yeah.
I love the company that I work for, and that's and if you ask me why, sure. I mean, I like the industry, I like the work content, but it's the
Yeah.
relationships. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't have said that about my previous employer,
Mhm.
but that was because I was very intentional about just doing my work and then clocking out. I was disconnected.
Mhm.
So again, I wasn't being intentional.
Mhm.
So the two that I want to highlight for this section are: tap into your resources,
Mhm.
because there's a lot, and if you don't find it, you can create it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then network, and for our community, again,
Yes. Yep.
I don't want this to sound like a pitch,
Mhm.
but yep, we're a nonprofit organization. We've been around for 13
Yeah.
years. There are a lot of YEP events, especially in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Come out to one, and you'll be surprised by the people that you meet and the experiences that are shared.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.